Right. Mike Laval on Last Word on College Football, helping us sort out Butch Jones's statements at the podium and elsewhere in Hoover, Alabama this week at SEC Football Media Days. Mike also had some thoughts concerning the rest of the 14 clubs in the SEC and maybe whatever else, Mike, during these 4 days in Hoover caught your ear.
Yeah, I think the first thing is, I'm not sure that the SEC has really managed SEC Media Days well. Previously, going back to the previous commissioners, even in the days of Roy Kramer, the SEC Media Days was a venue for the SEC to present its vision on where it wanted to take the conference. And as the SEC emerged as the leader of college football, kind of deliver their vision on where they wanted to lead the sport, to lead college football. And it was a little bit more substance in the media days. There was a little bit more of a vision, of a plan. It was a little bit more grand, and it was kind of an opportunity for the SEC to lead the sport. As I look back at the last 2 or 3 SEC Media Days, it seems to me like SEC Media Days has become more of a marketing event, more of a PR event, and that's fine because we're in a marketing and PR driven world. But I just think they're missing an opportunity to continue in a leadership role in the sport. I would like to see a little bit more substance. I think Greg Sankey's doing a good job as commissioner. But his comments are mostly about, hey, it's more of the state of the SEC. This is what we're doing with diversity. This is what we're doing in academics with grades. And this is where our sports are doing. There's no, this is where we want to take the sport. This is how we want to lead the sport into the next year, into the next 4 or 5 years, into the next generation even. And you talked earlier about Nick Saban has done that in the past and has kind of not done that the last couple of years. And these coaches get up and some of the questions I don't think are as substantive as they could be. And to me, it's just more soundbite marketing, PR driven, which, I think speaks to the kind of the culture and the world we live in. Just as I consider myself maybe a football purist almost. I'd like to see a little bit more substance in the dialogue and in the actual event.
Yeah, I may be restating to a certain extent your thoughts, but state of the SEC, but also kind of backward thinking and just kind of reviewing this is where the conference stands and this is what we've accomplished, and we're going to impress you with the total package of what we achieve athletically, academically, and socially in being out in front of everyone, where before it was, okay, we readily know that these are the 2 or 3 hot button topics in college football or in college athletics, and this is where we stand. Or we're going to introduce a topic that you may not even be on the radar for anyone, and we're going to let you know that this is important to us, and we're going to drive this initiative going forward, and we don't hear that anymore. I think one of the issues with some of the questions that are being asked in this hit me during one of the sessions over the last couple of days and watching on television is the internet has opened up the field to it's a great thing that because it allows certain people to have a voice, and at this point in my life and career it's allowed me to have a voice, but at the same time those baby faces show up in the media a lot more than they did years ago, and with that you get some fresh perspective, but you also get maybe not necessarily the best experienced questions and line of questioning.
Yeah. I would push back a little bit. I would take the counter argument. I think that the new guys who go to the media days actually ask more interesting questions. I think they ask in general questions from a different perspective. I would tell you, I think the beat writers and kind of the traditional media guys, I think they're getting complacent. I think in general they're complacent. I think in some cases they don't want to ask tough questions in a public forum like that. You look back last year, and clearly Nick Saban was not happy with the questioning at Feinbaum. And I don't know if it's the coaches. I don't know if it's the coaches feel like they have to attend media days, so they expect questions not to be tough because it's something they're forced to do. It's not something that they agree to do. And I don't know what the dynamic is in the room, but I would push back on you. I like having some guys there who maybe bring a different perspective and who maybe bring a little bit more of the fan psyche into the room. I kind of like that. It keeps the coaches on their toes. And, if they get a question from left field, I like to see what they answer. Look, these guys go to booster club meetings all the time. They go on, big orange caravans and whatever else the schools call their coaching. They answer the same question hundreds of times in the season, hundreds of times. I'm sure Jones has been asked about the quarterback competition at least 1,000 times over the last 4 months. So when they get a question they haven't had before, I always like to see their reaction. So I think it's good to get some of these internet bloggers and young guys and people, young guys and gals, and people with fresh questions. I think it's good to get them in there. I wish the SEC would open it up a little bit more. I think it would be great for the SEC to give out maybe like 100 tickets to fans and let fans ask questions. How cool would that be to have like, how cool would it be to let Phyllis from Mulga ask Gus Malzahn a question? I mean, I would pay money to see that. Maybe not Merriweather money, but I'd pay money to see Phyllis from Mulga get to ask Gus Malzahn one question on television at SEC Media Days. I'd pay money for that.
Well, somebody needs to campaign for that because I think you're onto something there. I don't know that that's ever going to be accepted, but it's a great idea. They let them in the building to sign autographs and get their autographs on the memorabilia. Just give them the entrance into the media room. I like it.
Yeah, just do it by lottery system. Pick 2 or 3 or maybe even 5 people per coach, and let them ask questions.
And when it comes to the evaluation of the media, I probably jump to conclusions there because I'm thinking back, and I typically am very critical of the questions of sideline reporters, of media in general. I just don't think they're well thought out. I think sometimes they know that they want to write a story on Jalen Hurts, and they're just throwing out the name Jalen Hurts, and they just want the coach to talk. So it's not a well thought out question typically. And then when I was thinking that this week, I just noticed I saw a bunch of 22-year-olds showing up asking questions, and that was the first thing that came to mind is, yeah, we're in a different arena today than when I covered SEC Media Days from 1994 to 2000 in person, where you had to be you had to come from a brick and mortar establishment to be at SEC Media Days.
Right, and you go back to your Jalen Hurts example. They asked Saban the same question he's been asked, but they asked the question just so they can write in the article, I asked this question and Nick Saban told me. So it kind of goes back to this whole, I don't want to get into a media discussion because we're not evaluating the media, but it kind of goes back to the way the media has transformed itself into today's media environment, where it's more, the story is more about the media person than it is about the actual story. It's me's and I's and articles and I think that's kind of watered down the substance of SEC Media Days. You get guys like Chad Niebling, who we sent last year, and Stephen M. Smith from Touchdown Alabama. I like having guys like that in the room, fresh perspective, fresh questions, and they do a really good job. I think a lot of the young guys that you talked about, like Chad and Stephen, I think they do a really good job and they ask really good questions. I think it's just a tough environment when you get into something like the sports reporter world that's kind of hard to break into, and it's kind of threatened. The digital environment, like you mentioned earlier, really threatens the beat reporter's job, because now players and coaches can communicate directly to the fan base. They can communicate directly to everybody through the use of social media. So schools tape practices and they can show videos of practices on Snapchat. Tennessee does that a lot. They show snippets of practice on their Snapchat account. So, what does the average fan need the beat reporter for these days? It brings a little bit, kind of the beat reporters know the inner workings of the program. They kind of understand some of the personalities, some of the things you're not going to get from reading somebody's Twitter or from watching a Snapchat video. But the beat reporter doesn't have the same monopoly on insider information in the program like they did 10 and 15 years ago. And so I think that threatens them a little bit. And I think that's why we see some of the blowback on the young guys or the new guys, not necessarily young, but the new guys at SEC Media Day. Just my opinion.
Yeah, and that's something that's just hit me in the last couple of years in evaluating SEC Media Days. Since I'm so removed from it, I cover it from afar now, is that's the difference, is that it's blown up. And my assumption was, without thinking about it, was, well, it's blown up because everything across college football is blown up, plus the SEC being at the forefront of all of this wants to put their conference on a stage and say, hey, we do it bigger and better than everybody else, and we do it first. And I think that has a lot to do with it, but it also just has to do with the expansion of the media has made it bigger. So unless you had a television station or a radio station or a fairly large newspaper back when I was covering it, you weren't there. So there was only a handful of TV reporters, radio personalities, and scribes, as we called them, from, let's say, the state of Mississippi, because you had to work for an established company to attend SEC Media Days. So it could only be so big because there was a limited number of people that were going to attend.
And there was a limited number of outlets. Going back to last night, it's indicative of sports media today. Going back to last night, I was sitting at the house watching television, and I realized when I was growing up, the day before and the day after the Major League Baseball All-Star game, there was no sports. They were the only 2 days on the entire calendar of the year where there was